Kiara about what relationships can look like in our different regions between for-profits and nonprofits and other partners that we might have. And then we're going to experiment with something new, and we're going to do some breakout rooms and hopefully be inspired by our conversation with Sarah and Kiara and talk about what we can do in our regions. And Tanya and I are both sort of not sure how the breakout room situation is going to happen, so we'll stumble through it together. All right, Sarah, you are first up.
Okay, well,
Sarah Cross, sorry.
yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Cross, use she, they pronouns. I'm the Producer Support Funds Program Manager at Oregon Food Bank. And my goal today was more just I was talking to Sydney a while back about has the conversation around food banks and food hubs kind of started. I know a few food hubs are already working with food banks. And I'm more here to just kind of get the conversation going around how food banks can work with food hubs. What are the challenges, barriers? What are the successes that have been happening? I am trying to be a loud, I guess, squeaky wheel at the food bank to see what can be done through our departments to work more cohesively with food hubs. And because we work statewide as a food bank network, and I even created a map that maybe I could share, but it's showing that where our regional food banks are in comparison to the food hubs and how we can really work together because of how close we are. So I didn't really have much because I am just one person in the large entity that is Oregon Food Bank, but I do move through spaces a lot, and I love to champion small producers and those doing aggregation work as best I can. And I also, sorry, I'm like rambling now, but I also sit in a national conversation that talks with other food banks throughout the Feeding America network throughout America. And there are various food banks that are already working well with their food hubs, so I can see that it happens. And I know Oregon is specific to itself. But yeah, so I'm more here just to listen and learn. And if you don't have questions or comments right away, totally fine. I'm willing to connect with you one-on-one offline or through email, however it works. But it's something I'm really passionate about moving forward in a very careful way, because I know relationship building takes time and there's a lot of nuances that go along between working with food hubs and food banks. So that is my little spiel.
So Sarah, this might be easier to kick off if you have what is a specific like one sentence question that you have for this group? Is there a specific thing you want to know about the relationships with food banks? Do you want to know if they have relationships with food banks?
Yes. Are most food hubs donating? That is a great question. Because of certain funding that has come out this year, specifically, so LFPA, the local food purchasing agreement has allowed food hubs and food banks to often work together depending on what the project is. But all in all, I think that's still a conversation that needs to happen, and how food banks can actually purchase from food hubs, because I know there are some local food purchasing dollars kind of swirling around the state. And I know a lot of like more rural food banks want to make sure that they're using their dollars effectively, but they do have funds to purchase at a higher price. So it's just kind of navigating what that looks like as they roll out the next couple of years. But my questions are, I know some of the food banks and food hubs like Food Works and our Food Works. I'm so sorry, Food Roots. Why can't I talk today? I know
we're very friendly. There's no need to be frightened of us.
I'm so sorry. A better one-on-one.
You're wonderful in all contexts.
But I know some are already doing work, and I applaud that and I appreciate that. So I will constantly be like looking to you to learn and navigate those. But I want to know if there were relationships that have been defunct because of things that just didn't jive, and how to talk about that to move forward through those challenges and learnings, what's working well if you are working with a food bank. I know from our end, the statewide coordinator here at the food bank wanted to know kind of like, what is a food hub? Because I know there's varying definitions of that, which we don't have to get into right now, but I kind of gave the rough overview of what it could look like. But yeah, I'm curious also, just what are the barriers that food hubs see to working with a food bank if they don't?
So that's a solid question. For those of you who are not yet working with food banks, why have you chosen not to work with food banks, or what is your struggle with working with food banks? Is there anyone on this call who is in that scenario? And this is a big call, so I'm having to go between screens to see everybody.
Hi, it's Sarah here. One thing I hear from processors is they don't know if they meet the requirements in their manufacturing process to be able to donate to the food bank. Can you talk about that?
That is a great question. And I know Sharon McFadden, who deals more with that. I would love to take any of these questions back, because I work with fund money, I like to say. I get to pay the producer full price for whatever they're doing and serve whoever they want to serve. So that is a great question. I really want to take those questions back, because that's a kind of realistic and nuanced question that I don't always deal with on a regular basis. So I appreciate that, Sarah, for bringing that up.
Other questions that we're having, or struggles that we're having with working with food banks as procurement partners?
There's one in the chat, Sydney, around lots of cottage food, farm direct stuff doesn't qualify to be distributed at pantries.
Could use help getting egg handlers licenses for local producers. We're laughing because there was a big egg handler. It was just an ongoing conversation. Who put, oh, Jack, you put that in. There was an ongoing conversation about egg handlers that I swear it went on for like 2 years for a while. It's sort of like the honey conversation is right now. So that's why you saw a lot of us having a little giggle.
Yeah, and these are great in the chat, and I will collect them and answer as I can, and then take them back and then send along some answers to Sydney as well.
Awesome. I love getting answers. Other folks that are or are not working with food banks, and what is and is not working. Lindsay, I know that Food Roots, Lindsay Ward, I know that Food Roots is working with food banks, and what is working about that, and how did that relationship happen?
I am actually not sure how the relationship started. It started before I came on. And it's one of those things that, you know, you collect a lot of history when you come on to a job, but you don't collect all the history of how everything started when you come on. So I'm not sure how it started, but I know that it could have been because a person who had my job previously now works for Oregon Food Bank. And so that relationship kind of was very, very organic in nature in her transition from Food Roots to the Oregon Food Bank. Julia Wenzel was her name. And so it could have been that. There just could have been some outreach that went on, but we reach out to them occasionally when we know a producer has a lot of excess products. So like they have a really good bulk rate. And then the food bank, whether or not they have the funds available to spend on fresh produce, let us know if the amount we have available works for them. And then similarly with food pantries, we do something similar. But that the food pantries are pretty small, and one of the women who manages one is here every week collecting an order that, you know, that she paid for personally to take home with her. And so it's really convenient for her to pick up whatever excess produce we have available from the week while it's still good to eat, but after it's kind of past the point where we think we're going to sell it. So still very food safe, very nutritious, very safe to eat and good to eat. Hasn't gone bad yet. And it's very easy to hand off to her for her to bring to the pantry. So you have a couple of different ways our relationships with food services work.
Yeah, it looked like Abigail had a couple of sort of pertinent responses that landed in the chat. Abigail, if you want to bring that forth. And then Delaney, you're actually talking about the Oregon Food Bank funds or the LFPA funds that Sarah is been sort of the mastermind of making happen for our group. So Abigail, if you want to share what you had to say and what's working.
Yeah, we're also benefiting from years of relationship building, but both of our food banks in Jackson, Josephine County sit on our council with the Rogue Valley Food System Network. And then with Rogue Valley Farm to School, we utilize the food bank as a backup purchaser. So in case school purchases fall through, the food bank is willing to purchase that. So it's not as risky for the farmer to make that sale with the school. But it does definitely seem to be like super relationship based. Like our person at Access is into local food, and that's why she like maintains this program. But if she ever left or something happened, like I'm not sure if it would be maintained. So just definitely a barrier.
Sarah Cross, is there, I think we all recognize that all of this food movement is really relationship based. Is there something that we as a network could be doing to make ourselves more visible for food bankers throughout the state?
I
Or
think,
build that relationship in different ways?
yeah, and thanks, Abigail, for bringing up the relationship piece, and like all this, it's all relationship, and I think it's, from my experience as someone who rarely stays in her lane, some people, the capacity is their lane, and so like because of that, there might be some kind of blinders on where other people sit in the space, and it's just kind of being allowed to move about a little bit more can lend itself to knowing that someone else is right next to them doing the same work. So anyways, besides that, a lot of this LFPA stuff that just came through this season has allowed different conversations to happen. So I saw that someone talked about IYS in Klamath area, and we gave funding to a microgreens producer in Klamath, and I know that they're now selling through Klamath Grown. They also do work with IYS and a few other places down there. So like there's things that this funding, and I know funding is a big crux for a lot of this, but through this grant that is statewide, it's allowing more access points to just have a conversation about, hey, you work in this area, are you okay with me introducing you to so-and-so? Like, I think it's a lot of that too, and like with that comes some buy-in, like, hey, I've worked with this producer, how are you about that? And so I know it just seems so idealistic, but I guess I'm also here to just introduce myself as a resource for people who maybe don't have capacity to do plugins and introductions. That's my favorite part of my job, is to just kind of keep pushing different people around to see where they fit. And so I appreciate these spaces, because when I've come in the last like few months over and over again, I just see the connections and the love and care that this space has for each other, and I really appreciate coming to it because of that. And there's so many good questions and comments, but if it, in terms of the relationship part of it, I don't know if it makes people uncomfortable if sometimes I reach out because they think that I'm looking to steal their funding to introduce them to someone else who might need funding. So I just want to put that out there too. I'm just here to make connections, and if there is funding, great, and it's more like just a conversation to start. So those can happen. Yeah, the co-packing is good. Oh my god, so many. Sorry,
there's a bunch in here. Carrie, I want to bring one forth, which was Carrie down at Josephine County, talked about how the LFBA funding helped, with getting to a place of having purchasing power that paid the right wages to everybody, but is also wanting to know, like, what does an ongoing relationship look like, and where does pricing need to land for food hubs to look like a functional procurement partner?
Yeah, that's a great conversation because pricing is something that has come up quite a bit because we have such a loose flexibility with allowing the producers to set their own price. But I can talk more when I get a little bit more details from the other food banks that I know who work with food hubs. They have a sliding scale of, depending on who the producer is and what they're purchasing, they'll slide between like $1.80 and $5 a pound, depending on what it is. So that is something that's in the works because I know it's a need, not just for farming, but for other products as well. And just to clarify real quick, something that Jude asked about Washington. Yes,
Sorry, Jude.
because from what I know from the person who does purchasing at the food bank, she's purchasing from all over the place. It's more about the size. And because we do also work in Clark County, I know that that's a part of our jurisdiction. But yeah, we do purchase from outside because the local isn't defined by the purchasing power at the food bank. Local is more for the local food purchasing agreement, which is 400 miles, no matter where we are.
I think that's helpful. Other questions for Sarah while we have her? And it sounds like, Sarah, we've given you a bunch of things to sort of share back to your folks. Have we been
Yes.
helpful to you?
Totally. Yeah, so thank you all for letting me come with sort of ambiguous question, and thank you so much for all the chat in the chat, and I'll do my best.
There was one more question from Christy Athens about who has been initiating these relationships. Have the hubs been initiating them? Have the food banks been initiating them? Do you happen to know, or do other folks know in this group?
Yeah, I would lean on those who actually are working with their local food bank, but for the most part, it seems like me and a few other people that I've talked to in my relative producer support world at the food bank, it's us trying to, hey, can we work with food hubs? Hey, can we, so it's one of those just starting a conversation, but it's ripe right now because of all the funding and support that's out there or about to come out.
And so this is mostly the food banks and not the food pantries, correct?
Well, from my
But
vantage
once they
point,
answer the phone, it said all of your lines are currently busy.
Uh-oh. Lindsay,
Uh-oh.
Lindsay,
Now
mute
it
yourself.
Let's see.
Anyway, we'll have to.
oh,
No, she got it.
I hear what you're saying. So some of the pantries are not in our network, but there's some that are. And so it's harder because in the rural spaces, the pantries are so much farther away from, and maybe Lindsay, you can talk to, Lindsay Grosvenor can talk about this, but the food bank itself could be hundreds of miles from the nearest pantry. And so it's on them to communicate to each other. And so you get a wild card like me who is working with a producer near the pantry. So then I have to say, okay, great. Now I'm going to connect with the food bank in your area to tell them that we're talking. So it's like telephone at times. So we're trying to still figure out what that looks like, but yes.
Gotcha. I'm asking because my business donates to my food pantry, so they know about me, but they've never ever suggested that I provide any food to them at all. So just curious about that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I can't in case you're wondering.
I think, Sarah, there's probably a fair share of us on this call who don't think of the food bank as somebody who would be purchasing from us, that we understand the food bank as someone that will accept donations from us, but that we don't understand them as a purchasing partner. And I think that's something that we could probably use some help understanding what it means to be what it would mean to have a food bank as a purchasing partner. And I am totally cut off Carrie because apparently I'm just greedy, but Carrie had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in because I learned a lot this year. I learned that the 13 pantries in my county actually all source their food from the food bank. So and this may vary from county to county, but I really appreciated having a centralized drop point, knowing that it was going to all of these other organizations. And I would just ask because, one, I had to include it in my grant report, but it also helped to know, like, I could follow up with those other community organizations and say, hey, just wondering what you did with, that 500 pounds of cantaloupe, was that useful to you? And that came from us. So that was really helpful to follow up and build relationships with those outlying pantries and other organizations. They varied from youth groups to faith-based churches, homeless kitchens. It was a wide variety of sources. And I would say halfway through the season, they stopped unloading my truck into the food bank. We would weigh it quickly, and then I would just load it right into someone else's truck, and it would go to Youth Project Plus or Maslow's Pantry, or we started to streamline that process. So I don't know if the pantries all work independently in other counties, but that was my experience.
Jack, it looks like you have a question.
I do. I'm gonna try and sort my thoughts out. I'm gonna do my best. So I worked at OFB like 2019 to 2020. So, I one of the discussions that was happening while I was there was like sort of how we have these like different food distribution systems for folks with low and no income versus like folks with income. So I'm wondering, and you'll find different, like I learned this from Sydney, but like depending on the food hubs you talk to, like a lot of those hubs will have like a social mission as well and like an interest in creating access for folks. So I wonder if there's space to sort of like integrate OFB's distribution and purchasing like into the food hub spaces. And I know, sometimes there's these gaps of like basic pantry items like flour and sugar, you know what I mean? Like these like things that people would love to be able to like, support their local food hub and pick up all together. So I'm just kind of like, is there a way to pass on OFB's like incredible savings on their bulk purchasing to like food hubs to like create a more inclusive space at a food hub that's selling mostly local products? Like, is there a way for there to be a food pantry day at a food hub where we're like just giving away everything that didn't get sold? You know what I mean? Like some ways to integrate like normal economic, like food economy participation, like into the system, words. Those were the words.
All great words. Thank you so much for posing that.
I think Jack, that is, that's the battle I think a lot of our hubs are fighting on a regular basis, whatever process we're doing to build food access, whether we're doing it in our own spaces or partnering with pantries or other organizations in our space. Like we're all trying to figure out like what is the business case for doing local food? How can we do economic development? How can we actually improve our communities in really durable ways? And also, how do we feed people today? So you're in the right group. We're battling the same battles here. All right, last question or response to Sarah, or are we ready to hear about how food hubs? Oh, Lauren's got one.
Sarah, I'm sorry that I was late, so maybe I missed this, but when do we get to learn about the success of the first year of LFPA? I would love to hear the story of how many food hubs and how many farm businesses and where they are and whatever you can share, because that program has had a huge impact all around the country. And I am quite sure Oregon did amazing things with that money, and being able to talk about that impact of actually physically bridging small business development and food access is really important, not just within our state. That's an important story, but also this bigger picture thing about where USDA puts more funding in future. So I'm really looking forward to hearing that.
Yes. And I mean, I can share like anecdotal stuff right now. We're putting stuff together, but there are people on this call who can share their own successes, Carrie being one of them, and working with Josephine County Food Bank, amongst others. But just to little snippet on that, because of the Feeding America group that I'm in, they're putting together some funds to capture stories from producers and food banks around the country to elevate those, to then hopefully use their platform to ask for more funding as well. So TBD on our coming soon on the impact, but I know you're all doing great work, and it's just having the capacity to even share it. So I thank you so much for letting me babble at you, and I will capture all your questions, and we'll just say this is the start of something beautiful.
Thank you, Sarah, for joining us and asking the questions, and we'll have you back so you can talk about, well, I guess you and I can talk about it, the LFPA stuff. Next year. Somehow we're already in next year, but next year. All right. Sarah and Kiara, you're up.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. And Tanya is going to help me out by sharing the slideshow. Super. Excellent. Here we go. Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I am Sarah Sullivan. I'm the executive director of Gorge Grown Food Network, and Kiara Kashuba of Gorge Farmers Collective and I are going to tag team this today. I am still kind of holidaying. I'm down here in Austin, Texas, so I wish Kiara and I were sitting together, but we might just do a little kind of transparent, tag teaming here. So just kind of bear with us. But yeah, really, really grateful for the invite to talk about our deep and valuable relationship out here. So yeah, just a little bit about Gorge Grown. You can go to the next slide, Tanya. So yeah, so Gorge Grown Food Network, it started in 2006. And our mission is to build an inclusive, resilient food system that improves the health and well-being of our community. We cover 5 counties in the Columbia River Gorge, both sides of the river. So all the way from Cascade Locks, about 45 minutes east of Portland, out to Sherman County, Wheat Country, Dufur, Maupin, and then on the Washington side, it's like Goldendale all the way to Stevenson. So it's a huge area, the size of Connecticut, if there's any East Coasters on the call here. And we started by running the Hood River Farmers Market, flagship market in the Gorge, and really focusing on, bolstering production of local food, supporting producers. And over the years, we've kind of gone back and forth between, really trying to expand access and then really trying to grow the supply. So we try to do both at once. And in 2008, we launched our mobile farmers market, which is a little mini food hub of sorts, at least according to you awesome people in this group. And so we take local food, 100% locally grown from these 5 counties in our region, and we careen all over the Gorge and bring it mostly to really rural places that don't otherwise have, big grocery stores and other great food access. And the original mission of that program was to really launch more farmers markets, which we did all the way from, like I said, the Goldendale Market, White Salmon, Stevenson, et cetera. So there came a point, as an anchor vendor at those markets where we realized mission accomplished. Let's pause this thing for a couple years, which we did, and came back online in, gosh, Kiara, I want to say it was 2016 or so. So that's sort of the beginning of our food distribution adventure. And Kiara came on with Gorge Grown as a rare AmeriCorps volunteer, mostly through Oregon State University, but we also luckily got some of her time. And I just want to mention this, like, maybe seems a little off topic, but one of the amazing things that Kiara did in her first year with Gorge Ground was to take all of the surveys, studies, community food system reports that had ever been done in the Columbia River Gorge over like a decade or two, and put it all into one place and then distill it into one amazing report. And that was our way, when you're starting food systems work and everyone's like, let's survey people, let's ask people lots of questions all the time again. Well, Kiara was really helpful in making us realize we have a lot of this data. Let's put it all in one place. So I just want to give that shout out because she has a really amazing depth of knowledge of food systems where we are. That's really helped her serve as the leader that she is. So Kiara, I'll kind of pass it to you to talk a little bit more about your role and how Gorge Farmers Collective started.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name's Kiara Kashuba and I'm the executive director of the Gorge Farmer Collective. A couple disclosures, my video doesn't work anymore, so sorry for that. And I'm also work from home with a tractor running outside and some dogs inside. So thanks for your patience with some noise that might come up during my presentation. So the Gorge Farmer Collective is a farmer-owned cooperative. We are a for-profit business, equally owned by all of the farmers whose needs the cooperative is built to serve. We have a 5-person board that is elected among the membership and consists of 5 member owners. So it's a really neat, it's for profit, but the special model that is for and by the farmers. We were born out of the COVID pandemic, first year 2020, kind of as a response to restaurant accounts closing, and just, the worldwide mania that ensued. And yeah, a lot of our path and our formation as a cooperative came really directly out of the groundwork that Gorge Grown Food Network laid, with building, our local food systems and creating that kind of market capacity and that demand. And without, that groundwork, we wouldn't be a successful business and wouldn't have formed. So we owe a lot to them and continue to work really closely and well together. Yeah, so I started in the Gorge as a rare, OSU and Gorge Grown. I ran the mobile farmers market program for 4 seasons. I did some farm to school work and had kind of a foot in a bunch of different programs at Gorge Grown. And then kind of the project that led most to my role with GFC was, one, like the mini food hub that is mobile market and kind of starting to understand the the business of aggregating and distributing and selling food. But then also this project that we called the Fresh Sheet, which was basically like the intention of local food marketplace, but on like a Google spreadsheet. And it was like, this big spreadsheet that a bunch of farmers in the area had access to, where they would list their weekly availability, and then we'd send it out to different chefs and buyers. And that kind of was like this first step in farmers like working together and, being like, oh, if we, can kind of sell and market together, then this opens up new sales channels. But one of, the main things I got questions I got from buyers sending that out was like, great, can I order through you? And I was like, no, you still have, all the availabilities in one place in this one central location. But you're still going to have to like communicate and write checks and get deliveries from all the individual farmers. but it was really clear, you know, to me and to the farmers involved, that there was kind of a need for more organized aggregation and distribution. And so when COVID hit, that group kind of, you know, we got them together and I was like, hey, do we want to, you know, do this fresh sheet for restaurants that are all closed, or is there a pivot? And the farmers were like, yeah, let's pivot this model more collectively, more collaboratively, but with a focus on a direct to consumer market, which was really taking off at that time. And since then, so GFC formed initially as a LLC, a 5-member LLC, just because the paperwork was a lot quicker and easier to get going. And then the next year, 2021, we filed as a full, it's a cooperative, domestic cooperative corporation. So it's like an actual, you know, legal business entity as a cooperative. And we've since grown from those 5 original farms to over 50. And we've expanded our programming from direct to consumer to wholesale markets, institutional markets like schools and food banks, and a slew of food access programs through Gorge Grown and some other partners that we're really proud of.
Yeah. So great. And just to, like, for transparency too, Kiara was still on the Gorge Grown team as Gorge Farmers Collective was kind of developing, and there was a little bit of tension at first because so there was this like new thing starting, right? And people are ordering online, but Gorge Grown Food Network also had an online local food marketplace because it was like 2020 and, you know, no one even wanted to shop at the farmer's market. So there was a one little moment with a lot of awkward Zoom calls where a bunch of the farmers and Kiara, who was sort of in between these 2 organizations, and myself and some of my other board members, we're just sort of like, who takes the lead on this? And I love passing stuff off. And I was really, really happy that the farmers wanted to take the initiative to really take the lead on this and to really try to make it into like a profitable business to move the needle on the volume of food that they were aggregating and selling. And so I could, you know, maybe there'll be more questions later, but that was just a really interesting moment for Gorge Grown to sort of step aside. And I think that's a really important role that a nonprofit needs to take when something farmer-led pops up like this. That was really innovative and really exciting to me.
Oh, and then I'll add really quick too. So then I came on as GFC Gorge Farmer Collective staff in 2022. And that was from some startup funding from a specialty crop block grant that Gorge Grown helped us write. So thank you.
Yeah, just one question in the chat from Yana. The population, so the entire population of the Gorge, it's about 80,000 now. The biggest town is maybe 25,000. That's the Dalles. Yeah. Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. Okay, so we have Gorge Grown and Gorge Farmers Collective now. We have a vibrant VegRx program. It was started in 2014. So this is where healthcare, hospitals, clinics, foundations, lots of different funders provide fresh, locally grown produce to food insecure residents of the Gorge. That's our only criteria for our VegRx program. And that program is still going today. It's sort of waned and waxed over the years, but this is just one example I pulled from one of our impact reports where during the pandemic, we got special funding from Knight Cancer Institute and a number of other funders to provide quarantine Native American and Latinx families with produce. And here's Kiara packing it up when she was with Gorge Ground. This is right before she moved to Gorge Farmers Collective. So originally with VeggieRx, we had vouchers, just like many of the programs around Oregon, which was a nightmare, just dealing with, you know, little fake money, counting lots of different pieces of paper. And, you know, at one point we were working with 40 groceries and farmers markets and whatnot. And it was just really, really a lot to manage. And so we ended up transitioning to boxes, like a CSA, so aggregated boxes. So it was really great when Kiara went over to Gorge Farmers Collective, and then they already had this aggregation system, right? So it was so much easier for us to be able to just pass through that funding to GFC, Gorge Farmers Collective, and just really built in a lot more efficiency. And, you know, Kara and I joked, not joking, like she still works for Gorge Ground, but this was a way for us to like really get that funding over to GFC when they were just forming. So over the past few years, since 2020, we've channeled about $190,000 to Gorge Farmers Collective through this program. And yeah, Kiara says that's about 20% of GFC gross sales. So do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, so it's a substantial amount of our gross sales. But I think the most like more valuable than that is one, it's like one of our only ways to really enter food access markets, which is really important to our farmers. And, you know, with the economics of reselling local food, like that price point isn't really accessible a lot of the time. And so to have this like subsidizing program allows us to do that. It's really meaningful to our farmers and the community. And then on a more businessy note, it's so valuable because the way, you know, the funding works is we will get a lot of that as prepayments in the winter, when our regular, you know, direct to consumer and other sales channels are lower. But we still, you know, we have year-round expenses and you know, payroll and stuff year round. So that's just been, it's amazing in so many ways, in terms of like cash flow and just like intrinsic value.
Yeah. And super valuable for us to be able to shift that like aggregation of what GFC does well, like Sydney said in the chat, and then we can focus on other really important stuff. Like we're leaning into more of the food access programs in different ways, or farmland preservation and access, which we really need to do right now to grow our supply. So just, I think from a nonprofit leader perspective, we have to be nimble, right? Like we have to shape shift into realizing like where is our new lane, and it's always changing. It's as you know, the food system in the world changes, and I strive to create a space so that people like Kiara in her role now, the farmers that she works with, her board members, and you know, other distributors in our local food system can come to me, which they have, and said like, hey, Sarah, great job with mobile markets and such over the years. We're focusing on food distribution and aggregation now. Can you help like with the food access part, or can you help, you know, get more farmland preserved? Kind of step aside a little bit. And you know, I just think it's really important to be able to hear that and say like, cool, great. We don't have to do everything. I had we were at a retreat with my board at one point, and I remember a board member saying like, if we're successful, we don't exist anymore as a nonprofit. Like the goal of any nonprofit should be to work ourselves out of a job, right? So I see Gorge Farmers Collective like really taking the food distribution that we did, like, you know, on a really small scale to the next level, and they already have done that. So Sydney asked, is this a challenge for you to see or have trust in these partner organizations? What do you mean, Sydney? Tell me a little bit more.
Is it, I mean, I understand, you know, you and Kiara have a long-standing working relationship, but is it a challenge when some of these folks come to you and say, we want to do this, can you help us with that? Like, does that is that hard for you to trust in those organizations? I'm trying to think about, like, what would it feel like to me if somebody's like, I want to step into this space now, and I want you to help me step into it. Like, how is that a challenge for your organization to do?
I mean, it can be challenging. There are a lot of characters and dynamics and people with different values or ideas of what food systems work looks like, right? But I think just, yeah, being open to like difficult conversations. I don't know, I play an advisory role or even just a sounding board role a lot. And there's certainly been projects my organization and board have chosen not to get involved with. And I think that's okay too. It can be a sort of like, well, see how that goes. You want to do that big adventure. We'll see what role we can play, but we also have to be careful as a nonprofit, you know, with our funding relationships and deliverables. We can't always dive into things in the way that for-profit businesses can. And we'll talk a little bit more about like challenges in a little bit, but okay, so you can advance the slide. Just a beautiful photo of some of the more recent VeggieRx boxes that Gorge Farmers Collective is putting together. We really try to think about things like culturally appropriate food as well, getting things to people that they love to eat. So yeah, so next slide is our old van, and this would be Kiara putting her mascara on in the mirror before our harvest dinner, which we were showcasing our little van at, and one of my favorites. Yeah, so this was our primary vehicle for many years. Kiara knows it all too well. It's a Sprinter with myriad phantom electrical issues, which I know some of you know stuff about. And it worked, but just a super challenge. And for better for worse, Kiara learned a ton about hardware and mechanics and other things she probably didn't want to. So if you go to the next slide, this is a way where Kiara's really helped Gorge Ground. So we had the opportunity to apply for one of those Washington infrastructure grants last year. And we just threw together an application really quickly. Others on the call helped with that. Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Kristen. But Kiara was just really super helpful to to help us design this van. I had no idea. It was like, what do you put into a grant? All this, you know, shelving and blah, blah. So Kiara was really helpful in getting that for us. We were also able to secure, I think, 5 or 6 of these massive refrigerators to create more like mini cold storage opportunities throughout the gorge that we're kind of figuring out. But GFC has been using those. So it's, you know, Gorge Ground funded infrastructure, but we share it.
Yeah, and like, I think, can I pop in for a second? You know, and like I was looking at the infrastructure grant. I don't know if it was coming through to you, but I was, you know, got it in my email and was like reading through it, and they were like this massive funding opportunity, but on this reimbursement, you know, payment schedule. And we needed like a truck to invest in a truck at that point. But being a cooperative, we, you know, in order to make like a reimbursement of like $100,000 worth, you have to spend that and show, you know, that you made that purchase. And we, one, didn't have the cash flow, and then two, at the time didn't have any sort of like bank loan funding opportunities, which is something we run into as a cooperative, because we don't have, you know, it's like if there's 50 business owners, who puts their personal property down as collateral on a bank loan? And so, you know, that wasn't an option for us. And so, you know, I kind of passed it along to Gorge Grown of like, hey, like this would probably work really well for you guys, and your, you know, your success is our success, and this can help you expand a program that purchases food from us. And yeah, and then, you know, we're getting to use some refrigerators, and yeah, it was a pretty win-win.
Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. Okay, so yeah, some of the tensions and challenges here. I'll just, well, do you want to start off, Kiara, and then I'll kind of chime in?
Yeah. Just going off what I was saying, like with grant applications, Sarah and I are in really close contact about, you know, what we think we're going to go for, how we can kind of write each other's needs and time into it, as like a, you know, just sharing the wealth back and forth. Yeah, and especially considering those differences in funding. So like Gorge Grown as a 501c3 can get money from, you know, foundations and like trusts and private grants, because that's, you know, the 501c3 is a tax write-off, whereas we can't get that money, but we are eligible for government grants. And then we also have a lot more flexibility, with probably like 80% of our funding being unrestricted from just sales, which is quite different than nonprofit models. So, you know, we use those different funding streams kind of to our shared advantage. And yeah, just like keeping in mind that like the success of each organization is the food system success, and it's always best practice to help strengthen each other as we can. Yeah, some tensions. So a tension that's popped up a couple times I've noticed is, so GFC has a lot of farmer owners involved, but definitely not all of the farmers in our area are part of GFC. And we've had, I think specifically a couple farmers who have left the co-op, you know, have started, you know, then come back and raise some questions of like, you know, is Gorge Grown only supporting GFC? And what about the other farmers who aren't a part of it? And so just, you know, trying to balance, you know, GFC can provide all these really efficient systems and benefits and partnership with to Gorge Grown, but also Sarah is really, you know, careful and like politically aware to not, you know, you're not only supporting GFC.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. So yeah, a little bit about like boundaries and saying no sometimes. So well, actually, Kiara formed this amazing relationship with Double Mountain Brewery, which is where we both use cold storage space. It's an enormous warehouse that they don't really use part of. So Matt Swihart, shout out to him, super generous. He rents cold storage space to us for a very, very, very reduced amount. So, but we're both in the space, and sometimes Gorge Grown and staff lean on Kiara for technical assistance with mechanical problems, maybe moving large amounts of food when needed. And Kiara's been really gracious to help with a lot of that logistical stuff when she's there at the warehouse. She also has gone above and beyond her role in our VeggieRx program, such as like calling folks who maybe didn't pick up their box last week, which was not in her contract. So just to say, you know, we both we've been working together for whatever 6 years now, and we're friends and we care about each other, and Kiara clearly cares about Gorge Grown, and sometimes we overextend ourselves. So a caution around that. And I think we have developed enough, you know, a great, honest enough relationship too, to be clear with each other about that stuff. Like, hey, don't really have the time to be calling VeggieRx clients next year. So I've appreciated that. And then, yeah, I mean, nonprofits move at kind of a slow pace. We often are, you know, writing grants that we may not have funding for a year or more. And that makes it difficult because for-profits really have to be more nimble. So that's been challenging sometimes. You know, for me to start or end a whole program, I need my board and my staff to be on the same page. So we can be a little slow. And then, yeah, just lastly, we've tried to source food like for our mobile market, which we're still running, from Gorge Farmers Collective. And this is like a persistent problem throughout food systems, right? But farmers deserve a fair price for their goods. And that doesn't always work well for us to distribute affordable food unless we're really able to subsidize that food, which is the direction we're moving as Gorge Farmers Collective and Treebird Market and others in our area really take on, you know, selling food at a premium and making sure, like, you know, folks can really get access to the variety of foods. We are leaning more into, okay, how do we make food? How do we get farmers the price they need, but make sure the food is accessible to folks that may not otherwise be able to buy it. So we're figuring that out as we go. Yeah, so next slide, please. I think we're gonna wrap up here soon, so there'll be like time for Q&A, I think. Yeah, just a few things we would advise for nonprofit and for-profits working together. I think just regular check-ins are really important. Kara and I try to meet monthly and often just kind of cold call each other like, hey, this thing came up, or do you have 10 minutes? And not just like formally or professionally, but you know, we can also kind of like vent to each other, lean on each other. We often ask each other, like, how are you practicing self-care or self-advocacy, you know, within the role that you're in. So I really value our friendship as well.
Having like a mini executive director support group,
yeah,
has been so invaluable coming into this new role. And you know, being like, hey Sarah, my board's trying to pull some crazy ish, what do I do? And just, yeah, that professional and personal mentorship has been so amazing.
Really helpful. Yeah, and often like over a glass of wine, let's go to a local wine shop that we like. So yeah, just having that personal rapport. And then, yeah, including each other in strategic planning. Kiara was at our day-long board and staff retreat last year, and she'll be with us on Friday as we're doing a big, like, what's happening with these mobile markets next year. So I really appreciate her taking that time and lending her expertise. And along those lines, I've just learned so much from Kiara and all of my staff over many years, especially my younger staff. I mean, I'm not that old, guys, but I feel like there is so much when you've had like a 20-year career in food systems, sometimes there's some rigidity in your thinking. I should speak for myself, but I feel like Kiara and all of the wonderful folks I get to meet that are newer to food systems work bring a lot of energy and a lot of innovation to the table. And I think that's really important to listen to. And yeah, again, just that honesty, like honest conversations. And, Kiara and I can both be like, that probably wouldn't work, or great idea, or like, what about this new idea? So, yeah, anything else, Kiara?
Well, and I just say on the flip side of that too is like to younger staff really leaning into your voice and your leadership. And that's been, a lifelong personal, professional journey for me. And yeah, just leaning into your value at all stages of your career.
Yeah, I think that's all we've got. Is there any questions, or I might have missed some stuff in the chat?
I'd love to hear if there's any specific questions about the relationship or what these relationships can look like. There's some questions that are kind of specific to Gorge Farmer Collective and to the organizations, but I'd like to, while we have both Sarah and Kiara here, what are the questions that we have about how their relationship is working? Because obviously my ulterior motive is that you go back to your regions and you start understanding or thinking about who your partners and collaborators could be, and expand your mind around what that might look like too. Is everybody just totally 100% clear on what it might be like to work between, for-profits and nonprofits working in the same space on a lot of the same things together? I know I have lots of questions.
I know
All
one thing I struggle with is getting people to go for value over cost in relationships to support the farmers.
Choosing the values of this provides more economic development in my region, or this is a higher quality produce. Is that what you mean? Was that Lindsay Wagner? I think it was.
Oh, sorry, Lindsay Ward.
Ward, sorry.
With Food Roots.
Sorry. Is that what you mean by choosing value?
Yeah, I think we struggle to, well, okay, I should backtrack a bit because it doesn't quite seem linked, but I think we struggle to form sometimes like better, stronger partnerships because we are so small, and part of the smallness is due to capacity, but part of it is due to also just the capabilities of Food Roots' reach to people. So I think some of our relationship is just limited based on the buy-in from our community, if that makes sense at all.
Maybe. I think I might have lost the thread there. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's very muddled in my mind.
That's what we're here for, so we can articulate what we're trying to understand.
There was a question in that, so my thought process began with a question in the chat, but it was like a bit ways up before the whole mentorship conversation. Oh yeah, as Jude wrote, having the trust of your farmer members, what are challenges and responses? So that was where my train of thought began.
Yeah. Well, I'm really good at my job, and I think
Yes, you are.
yeah, our first year of sales I think was 70 grand, and I think we're gonna end this year at like 450,000 in gross sales. And I don't know, it's like if they don't trust me and my decisions to get to that point, then there's a bigger issue going on. And yeah, so like, yeah, I'm good at my job. I do how do I say this? A farmer cooperative model is really powerful and meaningful. It's also can be kind of hard to work together, especially, you know, a group of farmers who like farming's kind of like the rugged individualist mindset. And we're, you know, the cooperative is trying to turn that on its head. But you're taking like a bunch of characters who don't physically work with a lot of people, and like getting them to work together. And I'm still, you know, trying to figure out how to effectively facilitate that. And, you know, it's working, but it's always a challenge, and yeah, a learning adventure. And it can be fun and frustrating. Yeah, but just kind of, you know, keeping the board and the farmers aware of what's going on, letting them, you know, be really aware of like what it actually takes work-wise, like on the ground to run programs. And yeah, I don't know, communication, and I'll let you know when I find out exactly.
I'm working towards it too.
Yeah.
Ever evolving.
Yeah, and I'm just reading Ken's comment in the chat here, more around like the value of food. And that's a really tricky one. So yeah, and just to be transparent with our mobile farmers market. So for years, the sales of our mobile market went up, right? And we were thinking, okay, maybe this is pre-Gorge Farmers Collective, but we were thinking maybe we can make this a sustainable thing, you know, not necessarily going for profitable as a nonprofit, but can we sustain that? And it's annoying that, you know, all of our funders want to hear about that, right? So we really tried over the years, like drive up sales and doing this sort of combo of food access and sales. And to be honest, it hasn't worked. I mean, we were up to like $80,000 in sales in 2020. Thank you, Kiara. And then things shift, right? And now we've got like Gorge Farmers Collective doing all that amazing business. Some of our other programs are competing, like Hood River Farmers Market. Our sales are way over $1 million a year now. And we're going into these rural places where actually Breen Goodwin, the director of our Columbia Gorge Food Bank, said it well the other day, like, you know, numbers in a rural area do not equal success. Like your sales in these population, you know, 70, population even 400, they're not going to be through the roof. And so we've really, I think this is finally the year we're like letting go of how much profit can we drive through our food hub, and how do we, like I said, subsidize food to still pay like either GFC or farmers directly what they need to grow, you know, the head of lettuce or another product, while subsidizing that food. And it really will be getting cash to make the food affordable. And we're figuring that out, but I think that's what we're gonna lean into next year, and I'll let you know how it goes. But that's also another way that we can avoid duplication of what GFC is doing. So I hope, I don't know if that answers, but
It does a little. And what Ken had written in the first part, before catering opportunities towards low income folks was really what I was going for. So I think a lot of trust in the farmers in Food Roots has to do with our ability to expand to their capacity, but not necessarily beyond it. However, in expanding to their capacity, we need to reach people we haven't reached before, and we're not reaching them. Some of them, we're not reaching some of them. I've been successful in reaching more, but we're not reaching some of them because they don't see the value in supporting their local farmers and what that really does over the cost. And some of these people are people that can afford it. So it's really cost is not that big barrier. It's just preferring a lower cost to the higher value. And so that was my link between Jude's point about trust and the farmer membership. And, you know, whether that for you was something you had to overcome was enabling people in your community to see that value. I was wondering if that was one of the specific barriers.
I mean, I think Gorge Grown's done a really terrific job with like marketing campaigns over the years. And that's kind of, you know, like there's a community culture that prioritizes local food a lot of the time. And I think a lot of that is from Gorge Grown's efforts. And so without them, you know, building that market, we wouldn't be as successful as we are.
All right, thanks.
Oh, good.
Mm-hmm.
I think I mean, what Kiara just pointed out is really important for the nonprofits who are on this call to see, is that all of that work that you've been doing to build markets, to, you know, create an identity for local food in your community, to create a pathway for a farmer to sell into, your online marketplaces, your retail storefronts, all of those things that you're doing that, to Sarah's point, aren't adding up to a lot of dollars today. What they are doing is creating awareness, and they're creating a launching pad for the work that folks like Kiara are now doing at Gorge Farmer Collective, and all of the other things that Sarah mentioned in the Gorge. And like that work is really, really important. You know, Christy Athens, who is running a food hub, an online marketplace, just got done saying in the chat, I wish we had a nonprofit that was doing this work. Because if if we're not doing this work synergistically, it's really hard to be a Gorge Farmer Collective without the work that Gorge Grown Food Network has done. And it's really hard for Gorge Grown Food Network, or it's easier for Gorge Grown Food Network to do a really banging job on their Veggie RX when they can rely on a Gorge Farmer Collective to be their procurement partner or to be their logistics partner. So like it's really important that we think of ourselves as really synergistic relationships rather than competitive relationships. The pie is big enough. And I think sometimes we forget that the pie is in fact big enough.
Yeah.
Other questions? Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Over the years, we have gotten all of the different USDA grants. Some of you are familiar with the Farmers Market Promotion Program or especially crop block grants to do that like true cost of food education. And it's been, you know, almost 20 years of that. So you've seen the figures like you know, what dollars stay in your community when you spend it locally, all those things, like lots of funding for, you know, media and advertisements and events and movie showings and all of that. So I do think that's helped just move that needle in our region, but it doesn't mean that food is equitable or accessible to all. And that's why we try to balance that with the you know, really trying to get low cost food to people. And that means either, yeah, paying the farmers or paying for the food, right?
Other questions in this group? I see a bunch of them. Christy.
What was I gonna say? A couple of things. Well, I was wondering about, looks like new for me, Rogue Food Unites. What is it? Does anybody know what Rogue Food Unites is?
I bet Abigail can tell you.
Abigail?
Or Stu himself.
Yeah,
Oh,
hi,
Stu's
I
still
do-
here.
Oh, I
Sorry.
thought Stu left. Sorry,
I thought you'd pieced out,
I
Stu.
am. I'm about to bounce. But yeah, relatively new organization, new for me. I've been here for less than a year, focused on disaster relief and food insecurity in Southern Oregon. We were born after the 2020 wildfires. Happy to connect with you all and happy to connect with anybody offline if you ever want to learn more about what we're up to. But we hope to connect more with you all moving forward as we're growing.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. So that wasn't actually my question. I was gonna react to I think Tanya's, the advocacy for shifting away from the big food systems. It was so interesting to me that the food bank, there's that new grant where they're buying directly from farmers, but it was so interesting to have that element wrapped in, because I always think of the food bank as this dumping ground for corporate processed food. So that's not a question, sorry. The end.
The end, Christy? Is that what you just said? Was there another question?
There's no way to turn it into a question. It was a comment. I apologize.
But it was a really good comment. Do we have some other questions in this group? I have a question back to all of you then. Do you have partners in your regions that you're not working with yet that you think you should be? Are there relationships that you could see that could improve your programs?
It'd be great. And we've talked about the economic development districts. I've tried, excuse me, I'm also having a cold. I've worked a little bit with mine. And I would like to approach my healthcare about a Veggie RX program, but I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I know some folks on this call do have some healthcare partnerships, and I know that that's one of those things. It's a mixed bag. It's like the food banks. Like some folks have relationships with the healthcare, and some folks have food bank relationships, and it seems like they can be fruitful in different regions. What about the food bank conversation? I feel like that some of us haven't really built those relationships yet, and maybe there's a relationship to be had there. Willie, you got something?
Sydney, I always have something.
So what I love about you, Willie.
First, I want to say, and I appreciate the history of what was just explained through the Colombian Gorge. I followed them even before I knew, originally from being from California, Northern California, Southern California. Used to come up here in the mid and late 70s, 80s to get pears and such, taken back to California. But I think in the bigger picture of what is being said, your history and your articulating your history probably was the biggest thing for me, because if I'd have heard the last 3 to 5 years, you'd have kind of been just another hub. But if I'm correct, I heard 2008, maybe one of you were around then. And that gave me a little bit footing to say, okay, they're not new kids on the block. They have some history, they have some battle scars. But I think the other thing was your transparency and your open and honestness of your journey up to this point, and still being honest and open is a key. Saying all that, I think some of our colleagues online is, do they understand the history of the Oregon Food Bank? Because if you don't understand the history, you don't know how or why we are where we are today, and some of the people that played key parts in bringing us to where we are, especially in the Oregon Food Bank, since we're talking about that. Early 2000s, Briscoe, my understanding was she was kind of the impetus for what we are experiencing today as it relates to Oregon and the Oregon Food Bank. And out of the Oregon Food Bank, the last 20 plus years, we've had national individuals and international individuals that's left Oregon, and they played a bigger part in the global conversation, quote, food banks and such. So I think some of it is giving us as food hubs, understanding our Oregon Food Bank history will give us a little bit more understanding, but to appreciation of why it's taken us so long to get where we are today. But again, and I say it respectfully, I appreciate the Columbia Gorge folks and their history. And I would hope that if it's true, nonprofits should be working themselves out of a job, because a lot of nonprofits been around 60 plus years. And clearly they haven't worked themselves out of a job.
Thanks, Willie. And you make a great point about, the history of the food bank, and also reiterating. I love that Sarah's board was like, yeah, you should be working yourself out of a job. That's a really worthy thing. And I think it's lovely that our board saw that.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments in this group? We've got a few more minutes. There's so much going on in the chat that I literally cannot keep up and look at your faces at the same time.
I'll share something about working with the food bank if I can.
Please do.
You're really working, when you're working with the food bank, you're really working with an individual who's going to try and advocate for you in a very corporate, large, and I'm sorry, but like a little bit disorganized and like hard to track environment. So you have an interpersonal relationship with someone that's going to go to bat for you, but that's what you have. You know what I mean? You don't have necessarily a partnership with an organization. That's just been my experience, both as someone working there and someone trying to work with it. And then there's also some turnover that's pretty ongoing due to the sort of nature of the environment. So I don't know, I think that's part of the hesitancy and part of the difficulty in establishing like long-term and resilient relationships. There's also a difficulty, I think it's changing, but there's a difficulty with that size of organization, understanding the capacities of smaller organizations and like what we can actually accomplish. So sometimes the expectations are for a much better formed level of insurance or like risk assessment or all of these things. So just something to be aware of and continue to like think about as we partner.
Jack, thank you for naming, those barriers on the other side of the relationship building, that turnover is real and that expectations might be different. That really what we're saying, I think, over and over again is that relationships take time and trust takes time, and we all have to put the effort into building that on both sides of any equation that we're making, whether it's between a food bank and a food hub, or between a food hub and a for-profit or a nonprofit hub, that these relationships take time, but that they can be really important to our mutual survival and to our mutual benefit. One last question or comment in this group. This has been a very rowdy call, which I love. The rowdier, the better. Do you want to get 5 minutes back in your day? Rowdy is good. Agreed, Ken. Agreed. All right, y'all. Sarah, Kiara, and Sierra, Sarah, and Kiara. Sorry, not Sierra, but it's hard to say Sarah and Kiara at the same time. Thank you all for taking the time to present to this group and answer questions and to lead the conversation because it was really amazing. And I know I learned a lot. And as always, I walk away inspired.